Okay. Wow. Okay. First of all, thank you everybody that is joining us online. Thank you everybody that is joining us in the room. Thank you very much for your patience and our late start here. If any of you happens to be a whiz with YouTube live streaming, come see me after this because I could certainly use the help. But my name is Jennifer Summers. I am the Program Development Specialist with the Wisconsin Center for Wildlife, and that you are here for the Wisconsin Center for Wildlife Spring Seminar Series, which is titled The Art of Waterbird and Wetlands Management. And this is a series that focuses all on the intersection between art and wildlife and wildlife management. Sorry, let me get this going here. Assuming everybody can see my screen. There we go. So we have 4 more seminars in this series. Next week, we have Oriel Fournier, who is going to be joining us, who's going to be talking about the secrets of secretive marsh birds. So it's not the right share.
You shared the wrong one, I think.
What do you mean? Where's the old leaders? Oh, so you're not seeing my, you know what? I'm just going to say to heck with the PowerPoint, and I'm just going to, so I'm going to stop sharing because I'm getting a little, sorry, folks, you're not going to see my screen, but that's okay. So anyways, we have I'd like to take a moment to say, first of all, next week we have Ariel Fournier. She's going to be talking about the secrets of secretive marsh birds. So a little bit more about how, like the scientific side of how we manage for these specific birds in different places, and kind of some interesting things about some birds that were not, you know, aside from waterfowl, some birds that are not as well known. But I'd also like to take a moment to thank the folks who helped put this seminar series together. We're part of the College of Natural Resources. We're using their YouTube channel. We use some of their resources, and they always assist with promotions and other things. So I'd like to thank everybody there. Wisconsin Center for Wildlife is part of UW Extension. So everything we do is kind of part of extension and reaching out to the public. And I'd like to thank Ben Settinger, who is our waterfowl specialist here at UW-Stevens Point. He and Professor Marie Perkins helped to coordinate this seminar series. They helped contact speakers and help recruit people and help make this a possibility. And then finally, I'm going to go through an acknowledgement that's an important thing that we do for the tribes in the area every time that we have a public presentation. The University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point exists upon land inhabited by the original indigenous people of this area, including the Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and the many other nations and groups that predate colonial borders. We acknowledge that with the colonization, Native American people have been dispossessed of their lands and irreparably changed by the actions of individuals and institutions. We acknowledge our responsibility to understand and respond to those actions. In partnership with the Native American Center, we commit to working together to honor the past, be intentional in the present, and to build our future with truth. And with that, I would like to go ahead and I'm going to pass it over to Marie, who is going to introduce our speaker. And then our speaker can present.
Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to introduce you to our speaker today. Sadie O'Dell has been restoring and managing wetlands for over 20 years for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and is the lead biologist at the Horicon National Wildlife Refuge complex. She's passionate about her role and inspired by the mission of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, working with others to conserve, protect, and enhance fish, wildlife, plants, and their habitats for the continuing benefit of the American people, and is a proud UWSP alumni. Outside of work, Sadie enjoys spending time with her teenage daughter and nature travel to birdwatch, hike, snorkel, and explore all the wonders of nature. And I'll just add that Sadie has been collaborating on many research projects with the wildlife faculty here and is currently collaborating with me on a project looking at the nesting blackneck stilts at Horicon. So welcome, Sadie.
Thank you. Let me know if you can see my screen now. I got kind of messed up there with everything. So is everything okay now with sharing my screen?
Yes, looks good. Thank you.
Good. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for inviting me. I feel privileged to have an opportunity to come back and to speak with you all at my alma mater, Stevens Point. And like Marie said, I've had the privilege of working with some of you over the years, and that's always a real highlight of my career to be able to tie those connections. So today I'm going to be talking to you mostly about work at Horicon. I'll touch a little bit on some of my other areas that we manage out of this complex. Issues moving my slide forward. Hold on. There we go. So I'll start with talking a little bit about management, and then I'll move into talking about our Waterbird monitoring program here, and then touch on some research and collaboration that I've had over the years, mostly focused on the Waterbird side of things. But before we get started, I'll just touch a little bit on the National Wildlife Refuge system in general. There's over 570 National Wildlife refuges across the country, and 38 wetland management districts that are also managed as part of the refuge system, and for 5 marine national monuments. The National Wildlife Refuge system and lands and waters are pretty distinct, managed under the Department of Interior, and similar to the National Park Service, also part of the Department of Interior. However, the wildlife refuge system is different in that wildlife conservation drives everything. So we always like to say wildlife comes first. So on a National Wildlife Refuge, everything that we do from planning, habitat management to recreational activities is always the wildlife first philosophy drives everything. And so that's when I say I really value the mission of the Fish and Wildlife Service. That's something that really drew me to wanting to be employed with the Fish and Wildlife Service. I liked that side of things a lot. So just to touch on a little bit on where our funding comes from, a big part of our funding comes from the Migratory Bird Conservation Fund. The revenue of sales from duck stamps, people who are hunters who buy duck stamps, and the import of duties from arms and ammunition. There's 5.7 million acres that have been supported by that funding, and over 240 migratory refuges and 206 waterfowl production areas. And then there's also the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is revenue from offshore oil and gas leasing. And this is the largest source of federal money. And that is 1.6 billion and has conserved 1.6 million acres and 300 national wildlife refuges. The duck stamps, several refuges. I have a list of the refuges here that have been funded with duck stamps, and you can see Horicon, 98.7% of the refuge was funded by duck stamps, which is pretty impressive. And then 99.8% of all the WPAs in Minnesota, Iowa, the Prairie Pothole region, all of those have been funded with ducks, the land acquisition in particular with duck stamp money. So it's a pretty important program. So 98 cents of every dollar generated from the sales goes directly to protect wetland habitat in the refuge system. So now I'm going to shift a little bit into what we do here out of Horicon National Wildlife Refuge Complex. We manage several other refuge areas, and we call them satellite refuges out of Horicon Refuge. So obviously Horicon's pretty well known, established in 1941, 32,000 acre Horicon Marsh. And then we also manage several islands up off the coast of Door County. These locator maps. Can you see with my pointer if I use my mouse here? Should. So here is the tip of Door County Peninsula. We manage all these islands here off the coast of Door County. Those refuges were established quite early. One of the first refuges established in 1912 and 1913. And then we manage a small refuge in Marquette County, Wisconsin, and that's called Fox River National Wildlife Refuge, and that was established in 1978. And then we also manage the Leopold Wetland Management District out of this office, and that covers over 13,000 acres of waterfowl production areas in 17 counties in southeastern Wisconsin, and that's this area here, and then Horicon's in there, and Fox River's over here, and we have some easements up in this area, and then here's the islands up here. So we cover quite a expansive area, and I like it's a lot to cover, but I also like the variety of the work that I get to do, from being on the largest cattail marsh at Horicon to islands in the Great Lakes and colonial nesting waterbirds, Fox River's interesting native southern sedge meadow, beautiful area in the area of where John Muir childhood home was. It's a really interesting history there. And then there's all kinds of interesting waterfowl production areas across the district as well. So the establishing purpose of Horicon National Wildlife Refuge was an inviolate sanctuary for migratory birds. So I talked about just briefly that, you know, a lot of our management and planning revolves around the establishing purpose of the refuge. So we always take this in mind when we're making our management decisions and doing our planning. The Horicon Marsh itself is a globally and state important bird area and a wetland of international importance, distinguished by the Ramsar Committee. The northern half is managed as the National Wildlife Refuge. That's where I work here. And then the southern third is managed by the Horicon Marsh. The state DNR is a wildlife area. We cooperate pretty closely on water management on the refuge. So we have a pretty close partnership with the DNR here. We're best known for hosting a lot of waterfowl especially during the fall migration, upwards to 50,000 geese and over 125,000 ducks. We peak on our migration about the end of October. It's kind of an exciting time to come and visit to see the migration. 2% of the mallard population migrates through here in the fall. And in recent years, we've seen quite an increase in the eastern population of greater sandhill cranes migrating through. So we've peaked at like over 20,000 sandhill cranes here as well. So that's been exciting in recent years during the fall. We've recorded over 300 species of birds. Many visitors that come to Horicon come to see to photograph birds. They come from all over the world to get a glimpse of species like the whooping crane that you're seeing here. We have significant breeding populations of least bitterns, American bittern, black-crowned night herons, black terns, lots of waterbirds. And then we're also known as the largest nesting population of redhead ducks and east of the Mississippi. And we're also a release site for the eastern migratory population of the federally endangered whooping crane. So I'm going to shift into the management side of things now and talk a little bit about waterbird management on the refuge. Waterbird management on the refuge does require some regional knowledge about waterbird communities and species abundance and the variation of all their different habitat requirements. Seasonal dynamics is important, so we do management that's timed to meet special needs of breeding of waterbird species. looking at their breeding time, stopover during the spring and fall migration, and also providing some wintering habitat as well. And our target species we have species that we target, we call them our priority resources of concern. And so we have a focus on some of those priority species, but we also really want to understand what those managing for those species has impacts to other species as well. So looking at the habitat variables for waterbird species management, this is just a little diagram that I threw together quickly to kind of illustrate the intricate interconnectedness between the different variables that when I'm doing my management and planning, that I'm always thinking and weighing over the pros and cons and different characteristics in my mind, but looking at water depth and how the water depth will be connected to the distribution of the plants and the food and the vegetation and limits to food availability. And then the vegetation and how that vegetation supports aquatic animals and inverts. And then how dense vegetation like cattails and other vegetation here, emergent vegetation on the marsh may obstruct foraging or create paths for predators. And then how that vegetation may affect the topography as well. And so, for example, some dense cattail may have a impact on hydrology on the marsh because of that dense cattail mat. And then topography in general. So for example, the refuge is a glacial bed, and so there's parts of the refuge that are deeper holes. There's the east side of the refuge, which is a little bit higher and grades up very quickly into the uplands, whereas the west side of the marsh grades very slowly, and we have a large expanse of sedge meadow. So there's different wetland habitats across that topography variation. And then looking at water level fluctuations and how that change in water depth and how the growth of plants fluctuate with that water level change. So different species, different needs. So I talked a little bit about the priority resources concern. And this is just a diagram and a good example of some of the stuff that I have to keep in mind when I'm planning my management. I look at, different species. So we got redheads, we got black terns, and we have shorebirds and dabbling ducks and secretive marsh birds, and then an endangered species like the whooping crane, redhead ducks preferring deeper water management, black terns requiring deeper water level as well, but also needing a little bit more particular when it comes to nesting habitat. Shorebirds needing that sparse mud flats and shallow flooded habitats, and then kind of tying that in with what other species will match up with some of these priority species. So other diving ducks, other wetland birds, other dabbling ducks, and so just a good diagram and example of everything that I'm trying to keep in mind as I'm writing my management plans and making plans for managing for waterbirds on the refuge. So just in summary, the different and contrasting habitat requirements by waterbirds in different groups and their management solutions benefiting all species may not exist. And the optimal management to benefit multiple species comes from assessing the priorities and trade-offs among different species and the different groups of conservation concern. Shifting into a little bit more on the wetland management side, in particular here at Horicon. Long history of wetland management at Horicon. In the 1940s and 1950s was the time of wetland restoration here at the Horicon Marsh. The levees were built and water control structures and pumps were installed. The main infrastructure, what we call Main Dike Road, and our main dam went in the early 1950s. Some of our sub-impoundments infrastructure a little bit later in the 70s, but we have a lot of infrastructure here. And today, many of these restored wetlands, including Horicon, face significant challenges such as the infrastructure that we have here beyond life expectancy, and the ability to replace some of that infrastructure with funding constraints and landscape challenges. We are in a very agriculturally dominated landscape, so a lot of issues with nutrient loading and sedimentation, and a flashy system with a lot of flooding issues as well. So wetland management at Horicon is both the art and a science. We have to have that subtle control over water that ebbs and flows over a wetland on an annual seasonal cycle. But the ultimate goal here at Horicon is biodiversity, to maintain the ecological balance of wetlands to support the wildlife here. So the guiding principle is to develop ecologically based concepts and incorporate 21st century engineering and science-based approaches. Here's an overview of the refuge here and the main sources of water to the refuge is the West Branch of the Rock River. You can see that flows through the middle of the refuge. And management and planning for water management on the refuge does require an understanding of the ecosystem processes of hydrology, the soil types, the disturbance patterns, both natural and altered. So I'll touch a little bit today on my water level manipulation, some prescribed burning, and invasive species control that we do on Horicon. Water level manipulation, we use the best available infrastructure with a combination of other tools. And we use this to manage the vegetation and create specific habitats. This diagram that I'm showing here kind of represents the natural dry and wet cycle, excuse me, of a natural functioning wetland system. And I try to mimic that to some extent. There are some constraints that I'll get into a little bit more as we move along here, but for the most part, a natural wetland system will go through a dry marsh phase, and then go through a regeneration phase to regenerate vegetation. And then ultimately, as water is held high, it goes into a lake stage, and then we will start that cycle over. Very intensive water management program at Horicon. We have 18 managed pools, our impoundments. Our largest pool being Main Pool, which is over 12,000 acres, and we have several sub-impoundments along the perimeter of the marsh, ranging in the smallest from 19 acres to 900 acres. I talked about the Main Dike Road that runs 5 miles across the southern boundary of the refuge. That essentially is our management capability. Everything above the Main Dike Road, we have management capability over. Our main water control structure, our dam, is located on Main Dike Road. And the Rock River is the biggest ecological driver of the marsh. Here's a good example of what our typical water control structure looks like. This is kind of an older structure, but it's a good overview of the way we're able to adjust water levels on some of our smaller impoundments. This is called a stop log structure. So we use these boards that are in the stop log structure to either hold water high, or with more boards in, or take boards out to manage for lower water levels. This particular impoundment must have been in a drawdown, and we were looking at boards in the structure. So we're using these water control structures to adjust water levels at optimum migration times. I'm doing partial drawdowns in fall to concentrate food sources in shallow water to increase the foraging efficiency of wading wetland birds. And then I'm also reducing water levels at optimum times to expose mudflats for migrating shorebirds as well. There's a few key points that I always try to use that kind of inform my general overall water management. I minimize water fluctuations during the breeding season, so I'm not going to do an intensive drawdown when I have nesting birds on the refuge. This is a nesting redhead. In the nesting season, I wouldn't want to drastically flood up or flood down I don't want to bounce nest or flood out nest. And so I'm try to keep water levels pretty stable during that breeding season. I avoid winter drawdowns because I'm worried about the impacts that may have on other wildlife, like our turtles and frogs and overwintering muskrats and other wildlife. And then I also avoid drawdowns and exposed mudflats during July and August, because if we do that at that time, we end up with cattail germination, and also we have the risk of botulism outbreaks if we have exposed mudflats during that critical time. Moist soil management is what they would call some more traditional waterfowl habitat management, and we do a little bit of that on the refuge, and it doesn't work well in every situation. It does work okay on some of our smaller impoundments. Some of our bigger impoundments, we just don't have the infrastructure to get enough water off, or get enough water off at the right time of the year. Drawdown is a really critical timing for us here at Horicon to get that desirable vegetation. If I don't draw down early enough, I risk the chance of invasive cattail taking over. So I do want to make sure that I'm able to get that desirable vegetation that I want. So I typically try to have my water unit dewatered by the end of May, so that I can start to get a vegetation response like you're seeing in the two photos. Shifting to prescribed fire, we talked a little bit earlier about having a knowledge of the natural disturbance patterns, and fire is one of them. One of the tools that we use here, along with our water management, is prescribed fire. Many studies indicate that there's a strong correlation between the vegetation structure and the bird diversity using fires, but that it may only occur in the early stages of wetland vegetation succession. So fire is used here primarily to improve the habitat in some well-developed vegetation, where, especially in this invasive, dense cattail areas, where vegetation can obstruct foraging and the movement of waterbirds. So it's a great tool for us here at Horicon when we're dealing with an invasive species such as hybrid cattail. When do we burn? We burn all times of the year. We do growing season burns in the wetlands, and we also do dormant season burns over cattail. They both have their pros and cons. During the growing season, those are a little bit more difficult to execute as far as accessibility goes, requiring airboats and special marsh masters to get around in the marsh. Very smoky. There's negative impacts to nesting birds if we're burning up during the nesting season. So it's not typically something that I do on the refuge. In recent years, we've been moving more towards doing more dormant season burns when there's no nesting birds to at least reduce some hazard fuels and the doing some of those fires are a little bit lower cost exit. Access is a little bit easier, but we do require a little bit more specific conditions to get the condition that we need to be able to meet our habitat objectives and consume that cattail biomass. Something that I really been trying in recent years is to use prescribed fire to encourage muskrat herbivory. So muskrats do not, there are ecological engineers here at Horicon. So I like to think of them as a cheap source of labor. What I'll do is that muskrats do not like dense rank cattail stands. So using prescribed fire to remove that thick residual cattail biomass, I'll do a dormant season burn. And then after that burn, increase water levels substantially to try to get those muskrats to move into to that freshly burned area. They like the fresh new shoots of cattails, and then if we can get the water in there to get them to be able to move around, that they'll get in there and start chewing out and opening out these areas that will increase more plant diversity and invert production, and it's a benefit to a bunch of migrating waterfowl and different species, and it gives other birds access to nesting sites. So that's one tool that I really try to make happen here on the refuge as much as I can, and have seen some great success, especially in areas where we do have the water management capability. It doesn't work quite as well when we don't have that water management capability. Some of the threats that we have here at the refuge, we talked a little bit about invasive species, especially hybrid cattail, sediment and nutrient loading, flooding, climate change, and emerging avian diseases. A lot of invasive carp, 98% of the fisheries here are carp. That presents a real challenge for us when it comes to murky waters and uprooting vegetation and decreasing water quality. We've tried many different ways to remove carp with chemical treatments, carp traps, and with minimal success because they just reinvade the areas because of the open river system. So it's just a constant battle, and we do what we can and manage within our means. A little bit more on the invasive cattail. Just a overview, give you a visual overview of the challenges that I face with the invasive cattail. When I'm doing a lot of my management planning and my water management planning in particular, a lot of my decisions are based on cattail control, and whether it's going to stimulate cattail, whether I can control cattail, whether I have the ability to control cattail. If I did not have the water management capability on some of these areas, I think the whole marsh could become it already is a lot of cattail. It could really become a real monoculture if we lose water management capability. It's a multi-tool approach. We do some spraying, helicopter aerial spraying that has some longevity. We've seen about 10 years if we do a spraying, that some of those sprayings we've seen the results last about 10 years. We've also done some crushing, some cutting, but like I said, I try to use the most inexpensive way, and I've been finding that the burning water management has some real positive benefits. I think we've kind of covered most of this, but I guess the point here was with the cattail management is that the water level management used in combination with all the tools in my toolbox is where you see the best long-term success. A quick touch on climate change. Got longer ice-free seasons, earlier spring runoff, warmer water, heavy rains leading to increased sedimentation and algae blooms, creating a loss of diversity, flooding, bouncing nests, and infrastructure damage. There was a study done recently by the National Audubon Society that analyzed different bird species that use the refuge, and they predicted 20 species to be extirpated by 2050, whooping crane and green-winged teal, black tern, and 63 species with a 50% chance of improved climate suitability, like the canvasback and the king rail. One challenging threat that I've had to deal with personally in recent years is highly pathogenic avian influenza. This is kind of a sobering picture from one of our islands up in Green Bay, where we had a major HPAI outbreak on our Caspian tern colony. When I went out there to do our annual monitoring survey, I found the entire colony had basically succumbed to the disease, and the whole. I went back to assess productivity, and there was one nest with 2 chicks. So that was one of the not least favorite days of my career. I think it was very, very, very sad to see. Monitoring, kind of have to speed up just a little bit because I'm watching my time here. So I apologize if we start moving a little fast through some of this, but our Waterbird and habitat monitoring program, we use the integrated Waterbird management and monitoring program. This is a local monitoring, but also is being done on a regional and flyway basis as well. There's a centralized database, and it's a standardized count. So we're able to use adaptive management and adjust our management actions based on our management. So in the past, we've just done just more Waterbird counts. What I like about this protocol and management monitoring program is that we're linking our habitat management and monitoring the habitat and seeing how the Waterbirds do respond to our management. Here's I don't know how you guys are able to see these numbers, but I just threw this up there. This is a raw count of some of the numbers that we see during our fall migration of our Waterbird count. This was in 2023. It was a drought year. We had some phenomenal growth of our annual plants out in our main pool, which resulted in some one of the greatest fall migration I've seen in my 20-year career here. We had a peak of 245,000 migrating waterfowl through here. A lot of those were mallards. It was super impressive. I don't know if we'll ever see anything like that again, but it was really cool. And here's just an example of our how we assess our annual vegetation surveys in combination with the Waterbird surveys. We do a lot of that using remote sensing, as we aren't able to get out on a 30,000 acre marsh to run transects for vegetation. So we use a lot of GIS skills to do that. We have one of the longest running secretive marsh bird surveys here at Horicon Marsh. So there's 15 survey points on the refuge. We've used callback surveys, and we're looking into using more autonomous recording units in the future. We do colonial Waterbird surveys here at Horicon. We count pelican nests and our cormorant nests annually. This is a picture of me doing a Caspian tern survey up on our islands in Green Bay. We do a fall sandhill crane count on the refuge where I use a lot of our volunteers. It's a good way to get volunteers interested in participating, where we stage volunteers across the perimeter of the marsh and count. One night in the fall, we count the cranes coming into roost on the refuge. Research and collaboration. We're heavily involved with the International Crane Foundation on the Whooping Crane Reintroduction Project that started in 2001 at Nesita National Wildlife Refuge, and in 2011 we started to release cranes at Horicon. We do 2 release strategies: a direct autumn release where the juveniles are raised at the International Crane Foundation, and when they're of fledgling age, they come here to Horicon and they're in a temporary pen for about a month until they get released onto the refuge to migrate with other whooping cranes, our sandhill cranes, on the refuge. A lot of people are excited to come to Horicon to see the whooping cranes. A really fun and exciting study that I was able to work with UW-StevensPoint on with Dr. Riddle and Shelley Dubay was Sabine Barron's master's thesis, and that was to evaluate sandhill crane productivity as an indicator of future whooping crane breeding success, where we put up trail cameras on 36 sandhill crane nests and looked at nest densities and success and colt survival. The results of that studies were that the availability of nesting habitat and nest success is not a limiting factor. However, colts were estimated to have only a 3% chance of survival to fledge, which led us to believe that the colt survival may be too low to contribute to the growth of the sandhill crane population, which raised concerns about the potential for the reproductive success of sandhill cranes and whooping cranes on the refuge. So Sabine was one of my favorite master's students to work with, as well as working with the Professor Riddle and Dubay. They were just excellent people to collaborate with. Nice picture of Sabine out in the field. I went with her to a lot of these nests, and we had a really great time in the field together. There's been some past black tern research on the refuge with Loras College, and some of this kind of similar results as the sandhill crane study, that a lot of the population was high, nesting population was high, but the survival rate was also low here as well. A lot of double-crested cormorant research up on our islands that's been ongoing since the 1980s. Contaminants. We've looked at mark recapture studies, survival rates and mortality. We've looked at emerging diseases such as Newcastle's, and also looked at a novel aging technique of how to age birds by taking skin samples. Somewhat recently, I worked with UW-Oshkosh on an ecological risk assessment for heavy metals, and looking at metalloid concentrations. And the good news was that there was not a lot of there was low heavy metal concentrations. We looked at sediment the concentration of heavy metals in sediment, hybrid cattail, and muskrat livers. We worked with our trappers to obtain muskrats from them. And then Sarah dissected the muskrats and took them to a lab in Madison to analyze them for heavy metals. One thing that that was gleaned out of the research was that the invasive cattail here could potentially sequester heavy metals. So that may have some implications for cattail management, and why we may want to look a little bit carefully if we were ever to, use widespread mechanical methods. Could we, potentially release heavy metals into the environment. It was an interesting recent study. And I'll finish up here with the black-necked stilts study that's ongoing with Dr. Perkins, and I'm really excited that we've starting this study here with her and her master's students. So we started monitoring for black-necked stilts in 2019. They were once considered accidental in Wisconsin with no breeding records, and now Horicon Refuge supports one of the largest concentrations of nesting stilts in Wisconsin, which kind of highlights the importance of the refuge providing that protective habitat for species, expanding their range that may be in response to threats such as habitat loss or natural disasters or climate change. In 2019, we found 31 nests breeding on the refuge, and this was the first known colony in Wisconsin. And we are up to 131 nests by 2022. Assessing that population trend is critical for us to help us to make informed management decisions. This is the habitat that they're using on the refuge. It's peaty open mudflats with clear unobstructed views from potential predators and this decaying cattail mass. This decaying cattail mass is from our intentional water management. We've been intentionally keeping this water level high for almost a decade. And as that cattail mat decomposes, it's essentially creating these mud flats that the shorebirds such as black-necked stilts are really liking. So this is a little bit of a different from that typical moist soil management that I've talked about before. It's almost, you know, that moist soil management we would draw down to the sediment to expose mud flats. In this instance, we're keeping water levels high for many years to start to see that cattail start to decompose, and that's creating that mudflat habitat. So just interesting take on habitat management and looking at things on a longer temporal scale of management to try to create some different habitat for different species. Last year, we started a pilot study to look at with UWSP to look at the availability of aquatic invertebrates, and we took samples at 10 sites, 5 associated with black-necked stilt nest and 5 without, used as controls. And the preliminary data suggests that there was no difference in the aquatic inverts at the control versus the nest, but we're going to do some further analysis of the nest site characteristics and food availability. And hopefully this information is going to help me to make informed management decisions for preserving the nesting population on the marsh. So I'm really looking forward to working with UW-Stevens Point and continuing that study. So I think I've left enough time for questions, and like I said, I apologize if I ended up having to breeze through some of that stuff at the end quickly. So I'll open it up for questions.
No worries. Thank you very much. So I'm gonna prioritize questions from the room. If you're if you're online, there are questions. You can put your questions in the chat, and we'll read those off. But I'm gonna ask. Yeah. The question is, so considering that the southern part of the Horicon Marsh is WDNR owned, how do you collaborate, or do you collaborate with the DNR to manage the marsh? Is that your question? Okay.
Yep, that's a great question. The water management is the main way that we collaborate. So there's a dam on the basically the management border between the refuge and the state managed portion. And the state managed portion also has a dam down in Horicon as well. So especially when we have high water events, we are coordinating pretty directly, you know, letting them know, I'm going to open up our dam here and I got a lot of water coming your way. And, you know, we need to be very, you know, especially during, like I said, high precipitation events. And if I've got some drawdowns occurring, or if they have some drawdowns occurring as well, you know, we talk back and forth about, you know, when to draw down, when can we move water, And so yeah, we're working very closely on the movement of waters and managing the Rock River as our main source of water. So, but we also work together on our prescribed burns and do some joint burns, cattail burns, and we also talk a lot about management and just work together quite a bit.
Any other questions? Yeah.
What is the burn interval for the units within the marsh?
What is the burn interval for the units within the marsh?
So we have a big burn program. We burn our uplands. I focused today mostly on burning the wetlands. Burning the wetlands, the interval is we take opportunities when we have them. So if we get the right conditions in the winter, you know, we have ice conditions are safe, wind, the snow cover is, we don't have a lot of snow cover and we get some good humidity and wind, we're going to take advantage of that. If I have some management plans that I've done some spraying or, you know, I'm going to try to take advantage of wanting to get out there and maybe burn that residual, or I have, you know, I'm trying to use all these tools in my toolbox. So some of those burns are dictated on, you know, whether, where I'm at in a management cycle. So some are opportunistic, and some are a plan to go with other management tools. But our upland burns, we try to rotate a little bit more like you typically would when you think about doing prescribed burns, we try to, you know, burn every 3 to 5 years on our upland units around the marsh.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. Yeah.
There was like a graph of one of the surveys, and I think it was for still. And one, like, no, 2009 had like a very, very small amount of birds, and I was just wondering why.
So she's commenting on, was one of the graphs, it might have been for blackback stilts, but it was about in 2009 where it showed it was a very small number of birds in comparison to the others. And she was wondering why, if you had any thoughts as to why that would be.
Trying to go back here. Is it
That
this
would be
one?
right there. Yep.
Yeah, this is the Caspian tern nest. Let me think here. 2009. Oh. So I'm not positive about this year, but I'm just gonna generally speak about the fluctuating numbers on some of our colonial nesting islands, especially this island in particular. It's a low-lying island in Lake Michigan. And so sometimes the population of birds can fluctuate with the water levels of the lake. So if water levels are high and there's less nesting habitat available, then the population will go low. If water levels are low, there's more nesting habitat available. And so there'll be a higher population of terns. And so I think that may have been a high water year. Just gonna throw that out there as why we're looking at that.
Great. Well, I'm going to say thank you so much for joining us. Now, Sadie did initially plan on joining us in person, but because of some uncertainty in the federal government, she was unable to get travel permission to join us in person today. And we found out at the last minute. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. And thank you, Sadie, very much for joining us today and for your wonderful talk.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm sorry I couldn't be there. Hopefully you'll get up there some other time to interact. And like I said, I'm looking forward to working with those of you that will be with me this summer.
Yes, excellent. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good evening.
You too. Thank you so much.